Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Better Managers Briefing this Friday. I'm Anne Franke, the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, and every Friday we try to bring you views and opinions on topics in management and leadership that matter. Now, today I'm really delighted to have as my guest Lord Mark Price. Mark Price is known to you from many years. He was the Deputy Managing Director of John Lewis Partnership and the Managing Director of Waitrose. He's also chaired the Princess Trust Business in the Community, and more recently has founded a startup on employee happiness called Engaging Works. And most especially, I'm very proud and pleased to say that Mark is our Deputy President and will be the President of CMI next year. So a big welcome to you, Mark.
Thank you.
So before we get stuck into talking about the results of a survey we did, and it's really interesting findings, a survey that we did in conjunction with Engaging Works, I want to just take a step back and ask you to share a few insights and recollections from your career. So maybe you can share with us, how has management and leadership affected your career? What are the highlights and lowlights in management and leadership terms?
Well, I've got lots of highlights. I was incredibly lucky to spend 34 years with a business that I loved. I wanted to be a pro golfer. I read archaeology. I was going to be a marine archaeologist. I sort of stumbled into the John Lewis Partnership. I only applied for a few jobs, and they very kindly offered me a job, and I was just incredibly happy with that. The culture and the values of the organization resonated with my own, and I felt very, very happy. So yeah, I mean, it just was all highlights, really. I'm embarrassed to say. I could only really remember two things that, I mean, obviously we all get frustrated at work and there are problems. But I've always had the mindset that you have a problem and that's your job, and you know the joy is finding a solution to that particular challenge or problem. But there are only two occasions when I can ever really remember being, you know, really pretty flat about things. The first was that there were 5 graduate trainees that started with me in 1982 in John Lewis in Southampton, and I was the last of the 5 to be promoted. And I was pretty miffed about that because I've always been quite competitive. And the managing director at the time, a brilliant man called Brian O'Callaghan, got to hear about it, hooked me up to his office and said, you know, what's all this about? And I said, look, I feel as though I've worked really hard and, you know, all the others have been promoted and I haven't been promoted. And he gave me some sage advice, which stuck with me throughout my entire career. He said, look, you don't judge your career over 1 month or 2 months or 2 years or 5 years. You judge your career over a lifetime. And if you keep your head down and work hard, you'll get your rewards. And from that moment on, I never, ever asked for a promotion. I never asked for a job. I was always approached. I never knocked on the door of HR. I was always pretty self-critical. I'd always want to know what I could do better, but I would challenge myself to do that. I've kept a diary now for nearly 40 years. And every night I just spend a few minutes reflecting on what went well and what went less well and what I've learned from the day and what I'll do better. And so through making it all about what I've learned and not relying on others, that's been a great lesson to me. And it came from that moment of lowness. The other thing that I learned at around the same time was that I was so keen to get on in a hurry. And when the graduates used to start at Waitrose, when I was running Waitrose, and there were typically about 20 in a year, I'd sit down with them and I'd ask them what they wanted from their careers. And a lot of them would say, we want to do what you're doing. We want to run Waitrose. And so I'd explain that the average tenure of a CEO is normally about 5 years. You might, if you're very lucky, do, you know, twice that long, but 5 years is a pretty good gig. And I would then say to them that if they were to have those 5 years, when would they want them in their life? When would they feel ready? And typically they'd say in their 40s, mid-40s. And I'd say that's a pretty good call. So what are you going to do now for the next 21 years? until you feel that you've got the experience to get there. And I think that conversation I had with Brian O'Callaghan did two things. It made me very self-reliant, and I focused on what I could do, but also it made me realize that you have to build experience. It's all about the longer term. The only other time I can genuinely remember feeling disappointed, Anne, was I was very keen to buy a business called Eat when I was running Waitrose. And I felt it would be a great extension to the business to have a sort of a takeaway that Waitrose could leverage. And we could bring that food into Waitrose shops, and also we could use it to sell sort of takeaway meals in the evening, etc. So I thought it would be a great extension. But for one reason or another, I wasn't able to pull that off. And I was pretty flat about that, because I thought it would have been a great thing for the business to do. And so there were two things I learned. One was about resilience, that you can't always get your own way. Yeah. And there are other people with other points of view, and they're as valid as yours. And it almost made me think, okay, well, what are we going to do? What is going to be our different strategy? And there is something about, there will always be occasions when something that you passionately feel is right, it just doesn't go your way, and you have to think about how you react to that. So those are the only two things that I can think of lowlights. The rest, I'm delighted to say, they've been highlights.
Well, that's great. And those are wonderful stories, and obviously very applicable now when we're having to deal with so many disappointments, and pivot quite quickly to accommodate the changes and challenges that we face. But before we move to Engaging Works, which I know you've recently founded, what does good management look like for you? What are the key aspects of a good manager of others?
So I think that this is where you reflect on the difference between management and leadership. And I think good managers are good leaders. Mm-hmm. And management is about how you have the resource that's available to you, people, financial, and how you turn that resource into the best possible outcome. I think the difference with leadership, and good managers have leadership skills, is that there are, I think, three things to being a good leader. I think, first of all, you've got to have experience. You've got to have credibility. It's very hard to lead a team if people don't believe that you can do the job, or you know the job, or you have something you can bring to the job. And experience takes an awful long time to build, but you have to have that experience. The second thing, and I think this is the most important between management and leadership, management's more about telling people what to do. It's about how you use that resource. Leadership is about encouraging people to want to do something. So how do you create a platform around any task or opportunity where people genuinely want to follow and do something, not because you've told them to do it, but because they believe in the, for want of a better word, vision that you have. Mm-hmm. So I think that really good leaders are credible and have experience. Secondly, I think they can create that vision, take people with them. And thirdly, they have a remarkable ability, the ones that I've worked with, in making people feel at the end it was them that did it. It was the team that did it. It wasn't about them as an individual. And it's that sort of a focus of attention on the individuals and the team that allows people to repeat something over and over again to a very high standard. So for me, the best managers have those things. They've got low ego. They're able to engage with the team and congratulate the team. They recognize it's the team that completed the task. They were able to build a platform and a consensus for people to want to move in the right direction, not because they were told to. And they have genuine experience and credibility to carry out the task.
So that's great. And it's a perfect segue into my next question, which is you founded something called Engaging Works, which is all about the importance of employees being engaged at work. And tell us, why did you found that, and what is it that you're hoping to achieve?
Well, as I said, I was very lucky that I had 34 years in the John Lewis Partnership, which I really loved. And the organisation, as it's known today, was set up by a man about 100 years ago called Speed and Lewis. And he had a vision that a business should be about more than just making money. The business should be about the happiness of the people that work in it. And his very straightforward thought was, if my people are happy, they'll stay longer, they'll work harder, they'll have less sick absence. And as a consequence of those things, my customers will get better service, as a consequence of which we'll have a better business over the long term. And he did lots of things to try and engage the workforce and make them happy. So everybody will know about the John Lewis bonus that's given out every year, or at the moment, sadly, is given out in much lower percentages, but everybody knows about the bonus. But it's actually based on much more than that. It's based on paying people fairly, recognizing really good performance, sharing information openly, empowering people and trusting people to do the job, caring for people's well-being, giving people a sense of pride in their job. And lastly, it's about job satisfaction, which really is about two things. One, it's about your relationship with your line manager and how good that is, and it's about your career development. So when I left the John Lewis Partnership, I decided what I would do is to write about that. So I wrote a book about both the principles of the John Lewis Partnership, but more importantly, in practice, how it really works, how those 6 things really work. And then I worked with a very brilliant woman who had a tech company to build a platform, as you say, Engaging Works and Engaging Business for Business, where people can go free of charge. They can measure how happy they are at work. They compare themselves to other people, same gender, same age, same industry, same job, and they can see where they score high or where they score less well. And then based on that, what we do is we just give people advice. We've got podcasts and lectures and a whole host of things to try and help people be happier at work. Now, I think that's good for the individual. I think that wanting to be happy at work is not a bad thing. And we find that it helps people progress in their jobs. It's good for business because businesses are more productive. All the research says that if you have a happy and engaged workforce, you're more productive as a business and more profitable. And it's good for society in a whole host of ways. People are happier, but also a successful business pays money into society. So it's happy for society too. So I wrote the book, I built the platform, I've made it free of charge. We've had now tens of hundreds of thousands of people around the world take the survey, 26 sectors, 122 companies, all kinds of organizations have done it. And I'm really pleased that we've found a way to try and help people everywhere to be a little happier at work.
Absolutely, and indeed, many of those values really do resonate with us at CMI, and we ran together with Engaging Works the Happiness Index survey. We ran it once in January, and we ran it once actually just very recently in across early May and late April, and we asked over 1,800 managers about their happiness index. And as you know, the survey results showed overall that the people were happier in May working from home than they were in January when we first ran the survey pre-COVID. Does this surprise you? Why or why not? And by the way, you can ask questions just for everybody listening. You just type them in under the YouTube. But firstly, back to Mark. Did that surprise you? Why or why not?
I suppose it did surprise me, and we've now had over 4,000 people from 10 different organisations take the working from home survey, and obviously we have people taking the survey about the workplace. And the things that stand out are that people are much happier, or say they're much happier now working at home. And they're happy across every dimension of the survey. They feel better off. That's probably because they're not spending money on commuting and all those costs you incur when you work. But people are saying they feel better off. They feel more informed. They feel more empowered. They feel that their organizations care for them more when they're working from home. They're enjoying the freedom. So there isn't really a dimension where people are saying working from home is detrimental. There are 2 areas where people are asking for more. One, they miss the social side of work. So how do you replicate that? The one big area, and this is obviously key to CMI and the work it does, is people are feeling their career development's less good. So they would be the only negatives that have come out in the survey. That there's some socializing that's being missed, and there's a deficit in terms of career management. But other than that, over all the attributes, people feel happier working from home. Now that's for 8 weeks. Whether they're going to feel that, say, in 8 months, I don't know. But in 8 weeks, that's certainly what they feel.
Sure.
So that 66% of people are saying that their preference is that they would like to have more flexible working, maybe 2 or 3 days in the office, 2 or 3 days at home. There's a good chunk of people, about 20%, who say, I would now far rather work full-time from home than go back into the office. So overwhelmingly, what we've found is that it's something that people would like to move to. In terms of the pure numbers, just to give you a context for numbers, in 2007, 2008, about 700,000 people in the UK sort of registered as working from home. Pre-COVID, at the start of this year, it was 1.5 million. So it doubled in just over a decade. We've probably now got, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 million people working from home. So it'll be fascinating to see what happens over the next year or so, whether it goes back to 1.5 or we see a far greater number. And then, of course, what that means for business and workplaces.
Absolutely. And we're going to come on to that. But just before we do, you did mention that a lot of the scores, empowerment, pride, reward and recognition, job satisfaction, are up. And some people, and I think in part we put ourselves in this camp at CMI, believe that in part that reflects that employees, their well-being, their safety, are meriting more attention from their managers and leaders than perhaps was the case pre-COVID, and that we're shifting from sort of a customer-centric environment to one that is actually become much more employee-centric, perhaps in line with the John Lewis principles. Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts?
I do agree with that. And in the research, as you know, the score for caring about an employee's well-being has gone up from pre-COVID working in the workplace at around 52% to 72% now working at home. And it is because employers are saying, are you okay? They're dropping them emails. They're thinking about mental health. I've heard examples of banks, for instance, that are now allocating either psychiatrists or mentors or some kind of support to people to be able to cope with working from home. So there's certainly a very strong people from those that we're surveying around feeling that the organization cares for them more today than it did 10 weeks ago. The other thing to bear in mind around that is the statistic that now says that given a choice, 80% of people would rather have a job with increased flexibility around where they work. And therefore, if they were given a job offer between one which was 100% office based and one which was flexible, they'd go for the one that was flexible. So I think that what you're touching on is right. I think there will be a change now in the way that people think about work and what they want from work. Having been allowed to work from home for 2 months, maybe 3 months or 4 months before people go back to their offices, they will reflect on what did I like about working from home? What did I miss about the office? And therefore, I think there's going to be a blend going forward about what's the best option for businesses and individuals. The good news for businesses is that people are more productive at home. Again, our surveys results say, as you know, that more than 60% of people are saying they are far more productive at home than they were at the office. Not least the commute time, but also just being able to get their head down and do things. And of course, that's got a knock on for office space. And so if you're thinking about how much office space do I need in the future, you could probably, with a more flexible workforce, have even less. I talked to the CEO of a very large global concern who said to me that they were spending 80 million at the moment on office costs around the world. But with a more flexible approach, they thought they could halve that and drop 40 million to the bottom line. So, and there's also the benefits that are going to knock on around climate change and commuting. So So I think that when businesses and individuals start to reflect on this, they'll think that having a more flexible approach is going to be good for society, good for climate. It's going to be good for the bottom line in terms of occupancy costs, in terms of productivity, but good for the individual as well to spend more time at home and have greater flexibility. There are challenges. Childcare for women is a major issue. I say women because in our survey, what we know is that women brought that up more often than men. So it's still stereotypical, but that's certainly something that needs to be addressed. But also, if we're going to move to a more permanent arrangement, people need to be set up with better offices, equipment, kit, whatever, to work from home. And I think that's where the government can maybe help, both in terms of big infrastructure projects, but also maybe in thinking about how does it subsidize businesses to get people working more from home and locally.
Absolutely, and exactly the points about better broadband, more consistent signals came up as well in both our surveys. Now, of course, we've long advocated flexible working at CMI because you can fit, in many ways, fit your work around your life in ways that make it work for you. And the interesting thing is that is coming out of the survey, and more companies are saying that they are going to reevaluate, exactly as you say, just how big is their office footprint need to be, and how can they adapt to put these changes in more permanently. But there may also be other changes, and this is my last question before we open it up. Do you think that what good management and leadership looks like will fundamentally change as a result of this crisis? Do you think we will become, for example, more employee focused or more community minded, or have greater emotional intelligence in how we lead and manage? Or do you think it'll just go back to the way it was?
I don't think it can go back to the way it was. I think the change is going to be too stark. And of course, we are only at the beginning. I mean, sadly, we are going to see record levels of unemployment, and there'll be a point of time when businesses will have a far larger pool to select from. And I think it's very hard to read today what the ramifications are going to be. I sat on a House of Lords committee on intergenerational fairness post the last financial crisis. And what that showed is that younger people did less well than older people. And so I think that the governments are going to have to think very carefully about who's going to bear the pain of what's happening now over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years as we work off our way through the ramifications of COVID. But in terms of the individual, yes, COVID will have made people think differently about work and their values and their time at home and how they want to work. But I think that a lot of that we were seeing anyway in the millennial group. Again, all the research that we do shows that that group that are under 29 do want greater flexibility. They want to work in different places. They want new experiences. They want to build a skill set. Quite often people say to me, oh, well, they're not sort of very hard working, or they don't apply themselves. I don't think that's true. I work with some brilliant young people in my own tech business and other tech businesses I work with. They just work differently. They just have a different value set about what they want and the contribution that they want to make. And therefore, I think that if you're going to want to recruit the best, you are going to have to think about things like flexibility, career development, being more values and purpose driven. Mm-hmm. And I think businesses can ignore that because there's a set of people who will just work, but more people want that. I mean, in all the research we do, we see that becoming more important. And I think that COVID will speed some of those things up. So the simple answer to your question was yes, I do think that COVID will make people think differently about their work and what they want. But also, I think it will make employers think differently about the contract that they want to have, physical and otherwise, with their employees.
Absolutely. So we've got lots of questions here from our audience. We're going to shift to that now. There's a question from Louise who's asking, what are you going to do personally to engage your staff when we come out of the lockdown to help them transition back into work? Now, I guess you're still working, right? Because they're working remotely. But maybe that question is, what do you do to promote employee engagement at Engaging Works?
So I'm on a number of boards. So Coca-Cola, who are based in London, I chair Fair Trade, who are based in London. And I think the first thing to say is that most are saying that they don't intend to go back to their offices until July earliest.
Mm-hmm.
And they have very real concerns about commuting and then how they provide a safe working arrangement. So there are some practical concerns they have, but also there's there's this view coming through very strongly that there are a lot of benefits that people have to working from home. And so in a way, you're going to have to think about not only how you persuade people to come back because it's safe to come back, particularly if you're in London, commuting less of an issue outside of London, but how do you make people want to come back? And it has to be around those two things which people say they're missing now. They say they're missing their colleagues and that social aspect of work, and they say they're missing career development. So in terms of what I would be thinking about now about a return to work is reassuring people you've really thought about their safety. And secondly, thinking about how do you provide that environment in work where people can interact again, and also where you can try to develop their careers. Ultimately, I think those two things will become much, much better virtually. I don't think House Party at the moment is particularly good, but I'm sure that at some point in the future, there'll be a business version of that where people can interact more outside of the office. And I think in terms of career development, you're doing great work, Anne, at CMI about virtual learning. And I think that's just going to get bigger and bigger because it will be the easiest way to deliver to lots of people high quality learning materials.
Well, thank you. And thanks for the CMI shout out. We do have a lot of online materials. We have actually for over a decade. And obviously we're enriching them with materials such as this all the time. But a question now from Zola. With what tools and techniques can managers and leaders be equipped to manage teams with remote working? You mentioned some innovations in technologies that may happen. What else do you see coming down the pike?
So I think that, again, in the research we've done, Zola, what I would pull out is that people think that they're being conference called too much. There's a bit of a pushback about, I'm doing 5 Zoom meetings a day and it's too much. And there's a balance between information, giving people information, and certainly at the moment people feel that they're getting a lot more information working from home than they were in the workplace. So that's good. But also there are some people, millennials and managers particularly, who feel that the boundaries between their working day and their non-working day are now being blurred too much because of technology. So the first thing I would say is that we need to think really carefully now about the technology. I'm inundated every day with organizations that I work with saying to me, you must have lots of time on your hand. I'm going to send you some more information to read. I've got so much information to read at the moment. So there is something about an overload of meetings and an overload of information that we have to be really careful about. The thing that's missing, arguably, is the human bit. When I ran Waitrose, we all used to, the board all used to have Monday together in the office. And we would have a couple of catch-up meetings on different things as a team. And then for the rest of the week, we'd pretty well spread. We would be all over the place in London, visiting shops, meeting suppliers, whole host of different things. And I had a list of the names of all my board members on, and also a number of other people who were senior in the business that I felt I needed to keep in contact with. And every week I'd just tick by their names when I phoned them up to have a telephone conversation. And you might think that's a really obvious and ridiculous thing to do. But I can't tell you how hard it was when you had 10 to 50 names on a piece of paper to phone them every week, because you get carried away with events. You gravitate towards 4 or 5 people that, for whatever reason, you tend to phone, either because you've got the greatest empathy with them, or perhaps they're dealing with projects that are close to your heart at that moment. And it's so easy to neglect the others. And so by making that list, I force myself every week to pick up the phone to talk to those key members of my team. And that's really powerful. And it's powerful now even more so because, you know, relying on a Zoom meeting to keep in touch isn't enough. It's that conversation, say, how are you? How are things going? And to build that personal relationship, I think, so important. I read archaeology, and I specialised in ancient Rome. And one of the things that always struck me about Rome was the way in which its army managed to conquer virtually all of Europe, and one of the largest empires ever in the world. And the way in which they did it is that they had a system whereby one individual in the army, one man in the army, was only ever responsible for around 8 people, and they looked after those 8 people. And therefore, if you think that you can manage effectively 8 people, but those 8 people have got to manage the next 8 people and the next 8 people, then I think that's a good spread of control. I once had a very wise chairman who said to me, if there were ever more than 10 people on the board, the chairman always had control, because individuals didn't feel empowered to talk because there were so many people there. So I think my point would be, more than ever, think about those, you know, 8, 10 people that are critical to your organization, your business, your sphere, and just make sure that every week you give them a phone call that's apropos, nothing to do with their working life, but how are you? How are things going? And you'll find it will, over time, transform the working relationship.
And I think that's such a great tip. And we were just talking this morning at CMI about doing that very thing, that in the age of the Zoom call, it's just really important sometimes to just pick up the phone. And you can do it whilst, you know, strolling outside in your garden or walking your dog. So it's a really important point. Well, we're coming to the end of the session, but I'm going to end with the last question from Susan. So she's saying, we'll be looking for those different leadership qualities to support a virtual workforce and a virtual workplace. What if you were to choose the 3 most valuable qualities for your leaders? What would they be?
So putting to one side what I said earlier about the importance for managers to be experienced and credible, to be able to create a vision for their teams that they buy into, and then acknowledging the success of the teams. I think that having leaders who readily acknowledge the importance and the contribution of all the people in the team. The reality is we're all different. We've all had a different education. We've all had different experiences. We've all had different upbringings. We've all experienced different cultures. And so even when we all say we agree on a point, we actually have a different take and a different angle on it. And I think what leaders are able to do, the ones I look for, is to acknowledge that they have a point of view, but they just have a different point of view to everybody else based on their knowledge and their experience. And therefore to genuinely welcome other people's points of view and to try and understand why they form them to improve your own point of view, I think is really, really important. So what does that mean? It means that you want people to be transparent, you want people to be honest, you want people to understand that they're not better than somebody else, they're just different to somebody else. And I think if you can get a team working together, acknowledging each other's strengths, and also acknowledging that every individual has flaws, then I could think you can go an awful long way. So I think it's those skill sets that I think are most important in pulling together a senior leadership team. I'll illustrate it if I can with a really, really quick story. I worked with a fantastically talented manager some years ago. And if ever I wanted something done, I'd ask this manager. But the feedback from everybody in the organization was that eggs were smashed, people weren't consulted, it was all bulldozed through, it wasn't good. But I knew this individual got results. And the individual came to see me and said that they wanted to be on the board. That was their ambition. And what they said to me is, if you just told everybody to do what I say, we'd get so much more done. Just tell them to listen to me and do what I say. And so I try to explain that you can't go through your business career just telling people what to do. If I wanted to buy a piece of land to build a Waitrose shop, I couldn't direct the owner of the land to sell it to me. I had no control over them. And so what you realize is in many ways, the more senior you become, the less control you have, not the more, over individuals' actions and their ability to perform. But what you have to develop is this skill to persuade people, to see the point, to want to do it, and want to do it because they believe it's the best thing to do. And so for me, one of the most important things is making sure that a team of people can empathize with another person's point of view, can understand why they do or don't want to do something, and therefore, from understanding the world from their point of view, is able to adapt their own view to get the right outcome.
Brilliant. So transparency, honesty, the ability to listen with empathy and use that empathy and understanding others to motivate them. Mark, thank you so much. Everybody listening, thank you so much for your questions. And we're delighted to welcome you to CMI and look forward to working with you. So thank you, everybody, for listening. And next week, we're going to be looking at what it's like to manage frontline workers, those that are still and have been throughout the crisis, going into work and keeping the nation moving and fed in this particular case. So thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.